No one expected this. For decades, Canada stood quietly in the shadow of its southern neighbor, stable, reliable, but rarely in the global spotlight. The United States, with its immense economy, cultural dominance, and political weight, always captured the headlines. But now, as the American system buckles under the weight of its own crises, economic, political, and social, something unexpected is happening. Canada is not just weathering the storm. It's rising through it. While the U.S. enters a phase of recession, division, and global retreat, Canada is quietly emerging as a new center of stability, opportunity, and long-term resilience. And the contrast couldn't be more striking. The warning signs in the U.S. are hard to ignore. Inflation remains volatile, debt levels are spiraling, interest rates are straining household budgets, and investor confidence is faltering. In cities across America, layoffs are mounting, small businesses are closing, and homelessness is rising. The political gridlock in Washington has paralyzed key policy decisions, and social unrest simmers just beneath the surface. But north of the border, a different picture is forming. While not immune to global pressures, Canada has avoided the worst of the economic fallout. In fact, in key sectors, energy, trade, immigration, and technology, it is gaining ground, and fast. Much of this comes down to positioning. As the U.S. turns inward, Canada is expanding outward. Its trade diversification strategy, years in the making, is beginning to pay off. When U.S. tariffs and diplomatic instability began pushing away international partners, Canada stepped in. It signed new trade agreements, opened new supply chains, and offered what global investors crave most: predictability. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the EU, the CPTPP with Pacific nations, and strategic ties with the UK, Japan, and South Korea have allowed Canada to grow its export base, even as the US faces mounting trade isolation. But it goes deeper. Canada's energy strategy, long criticized for being too cautious, is suddenly proving to be an asset. While the U.S. battles with energy shortages, grid instability, and fluctuating gas prices, Canada has emerged as a reliable supplier, not just of oil and gas, but also of critical minerals, hydroelectric power, and increasingly, green technologies. As global markets seek alternatives to unstable regions, Canada's mix of natural resources and environmental credibility is drawing in both capital and partners. New infrastructure projects, pipelines, battery factories, hydrogen hubs, are being backed by multinational investors looking for safe, long-term returns. And Canada, unlike its southern neighbor, is offering exactly that. Immigration is another factor. While the U.S. tightens its borders and polarizes its population with culture wars, Canada is strategically increasing its immigrant intake, not out of charity, but out of necessity. Highly skilled workers, tech entrepreneurs, healthcare professionals, they're being recruited from around the world to address labor shortages and fuel economic growth. And it's working. Canada's population is growing at record levels, and with it, its tax base, consumer markets, and innovation potential. Where U.S. cities are struggling to retain talent, Canadian cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are booming with international professionals building their futures. In the tech sector, this divergence is becoming especially clear. As Silicon Valley reels from layoffs, stock crashes, and tightening capital, Canada's innovation hubs are on the rise. Government incentives, global partnerships, and a strong education system are turning Canadian cities into magnets for AI research, biotech, and cleantech. The stability of the Canadian dollar, the lower cost of living, and the country's international openness make it a compelling alternative for both startups and major tech firms. In an age of global uncertainty, Canada is offering something increasingly rare: a place where the future feels possible again. Even in housing, where both countries face affordability crises, Canada's approach is gaining international attention. Zoning reforms, Immigration-linked housing incentives and rapid urban development projects are beginning to reshape the market. While imperfect and still challenged by high demand, Canada's housing strategy appears more responsive and forward-looking than the fragmented policies seen across much of the U.S. As American cities struggle to balance private development with public need, Canadian provinces are moving toward solutions, even if difficult, that prioritize long-term sustainability. And as trust in U.S. institutions erodes, from Congress to the courts to the media, Canada's reputation for transparency, rule of law, and competent governance is paying dividends. Global companies are choosing Canada as a base for operations. Foreign students are choosing Canada over the US for education. Tourists are choosing Canadian destinations for safety and value. And more importantly, the world is beginning to see Canada not as a satellite of the US, but as a sovereign player with its own agenda and its own advantages. The psychological shift may be the most important of all. For generations, Canadians defined themselves in relation to the US, economically smaller, culturally quieter, politically more cautious. But today, that dynamic is changing. Confidence is growing. Pride is rising. With it, a new kind of soft power, one built not on spectacle or dominance, but on steadiness, inclusivity, and quiet leadership. In a time when global systems are unraveling, Canada's strength is that it doesn't try to overpower the world. It tries to work with it. None of this means Canada is without problems. Inflation exists. Inequality is rising. Climate risk looms large. But what sets Canada apart is the trajectory. While the US lurches from crisis to crisis, Canada is building something, slowly, deliberately, and with a view toward resilience. It's not a superpower in the old sense. But it may be something more important, a model for what comes next. And if the American recession deepens, if Washington remains gridlocked, if trust continues to decay, then Canada's relative ascent will only accelerate. It won't be flashy. It won't be loud. But it will be real. In a world looking for stability, credibility, and long-term vision, Canada is quietly stepping into the role the US seems to be abandoning. As the American system shows signs of deeper economic and social fatigue, Canada's quiet ascent is beginning to shift global calculations. In boardrooms from Singapore to Stockholm, investment advisors are rebalancing portfolios, increasingly steering clients toward Canadian assets, not because Canada promises explosive returns, but because it promises reliability. That quality, once taken for granted in the US, has become a scarce and valuable currency. The Canadian banking system, for example, has long been considered one of the most conservative in the developed world, and now that caution is paying off. While regional banks in the US face liquidity crises and investor panic, Canada's financial institutions remain stable, tightly regulated, and largely shielded from speculative volatility. When economic uncertainty dominates headlines, it's these fundamentals that attract institutional capital. Pension funds, sovereign wealth managers, and long-term investors are quietly shifting funds northward. It's not dramatic. It's deliberate. In agriculture, too, Canada is beginning to assert itself. As climate change intensifies and global food systems come under pressure, Canada's vast freshwater reserves, arable land, and northern climate resilience are becoming strategic assets. In contrast to drought-plagued U.S. states like California and Arizona, Canadian provinces such as Saskatchewan and Manitoba are expanding exports of wheat, canola, pulses, and protein to new markets. With U.S. agricultural supply chains rattled by extreme weather, trade policy shifts, and domestic labor shortages, international buyers are turning to Canada as a more dependable source of food. Even politically, Canada's neutrality and diplomacy are being revalued. As Washington's foreign policy grows more erratic, with shifts in leadership triggering dramatic U-turns in global strategy, Canada's calm, rules-based approach is gaining quiet influence. In multilateral forums, trade dispute resolution, and peacekeeping discussions, Canadian diplomats are being invited to the table not because of power, but because of trust. The absence of radical swings in Canadian policy gives other countries confidence that agreements signed today will still matter tomorrow. That kind of trust, once associated with the US, is now harder to come by. Culturally, too, the tide is shifting. While Hollywood and Silicon Valley still dominate the global narrative, Canadian media, art, and entertainment are carving out a distinctive space, especially among younger audiences tired of polarization and political exhaustion. Canadian cities are producing award-winning film, music, literature, and digital content that reflects global diversity without the weight of national baggage. The Canadian brand, once considered quiet to the point of invisibility, is being redefined as open, peaceful, and quietly progressive. And at the heart of all this is a simple truth. Canada is winning not because it's trying to replace America, but because it isn't. It's not mimicking superpower behavior. It's not seeking dominance. It's offering something else entirely, an alternative. A model of governance that balances capitalism with social stability. A country that embraces immigration as a growth engine rather than a threat. A society where healthcare is not a privilege, and where mass shootings don't define the weekly news cycle. In a time of global anxiety, that image has power. But this shift also comes with new responsibilities and new risks. As Canada rises, it will face increasing pressure to take on a leadership role it may not be fully prepared for. It will be asked to make harder choices on global issues, to defend its values more assertively, and to stand firm when the systems it benefits from come under threat. And it will have to do all this without losing what makes it different: the balance, the humility, the commitment to consensus over conflict. For now, though, the trajectory is clear. As America turns inward, fighting battles within itself, Canada is moving steadily outward, building partnerships, growing markets, and strengthening its position. This is not a race for dominance. It's a quiet realignment. A reshaping of influence in the post-American century. And for those watching closely, it's no longer a surprise that global investors, families, and innovators are turning their attention to the North. In the noise of a collapsing empire, Canada's signal is calm, consistent, and growing stronger. Because this is still only the beginning.